statement, but the statement in full has been circulated, your opening statement, to all of the members, and I want to afford them an opportunity for questions.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And our final presentations are from, is it Dr. Griffin, Dr. Boland, or both of you? Whatever way you want.
Okay. So, Chairperson, committee members, thank you for the invitation to present our research to the committee's discussion on Jobpath. We're joined today by Dr. Aisling Tuitt, an Irish Research Council postdoc researcher on the Waterford Unemployment Research Collaborative Project at WIT. Since 2012, we've interviewed 121 unemployed individuals in an aspiration to capture the experience of unemployment. Gathered over 7 years, our work captures the considerable transformation of welfare services under the Pathways to Work initiative. Since 2014, in our data, we clearly see a significant shift towards a less supportive, more conditional, less empathetic, more pressurising welfare system, where the threat of sanctions are ever present. The individuals subject to this are forced to perform as directed by case officers in intro and job path providers, often against their better judgment and usually without a positive outcome for themselves. Since 2016, many job seekers distinguish between their experience in intro offices and their referral to Jobpath as a very distinct intensification of pressure upon them. They moved from a bureaucratic system, which can be unsympathetic and is often given to autocratic direction and demands, to one that actively and capriciously patronises, cajoles, threatens, manipulates and at times bullies them. Many identified this service as the state deliberately attempting to lower their expectations of work. First in terms of their reservation wage, but also interfering in their family and caring responsibilities. Long-term concerns for career development and life balance were notably absent from Jobpath providers' concerns. While they may be intended to support re-entry to work, many aspects of welfare services on the various schemes compound the already negative experience of unemployment. In our research, we encountered 25 individuals who report direct personal experience with Jobpath, largely tourist nua. We did not seek out positive or negative experiences, rather than just authentic accounts of the contemporary experience of unemployment. And we encounter reflections on the service that are very different from those in the evaluations of the department and Jobpath providers. All our interviewees, all 25, recalled being forced to undertake futile bureaucratic routines, such as mandated and monitored job search activity. For example, they were watched over while sitting at a computer for a number of hours while they did internet searches for jobs. They had their CV rewritten for them or massaged in order to orientate them towards existing job interviews without reference to long-term career development, personal circumstances or responsibilities. We got reports from all people we spoke to of being forced to undertake coaching, personal effectiveness and confidence training, which interviewees reported was delivered largely by unqualified and inexperienced trainers and actually served to undermine their confidence and sense of self-worth. They were asked over and over again for proof of job search under suspicion of duplicity. They felt intimidated over technical and minor infractions of the Byzantine rules in these schemes, and they were often required to accept employment that individuals considered incompatible with their personal career ambitions or their family responsibilities. Specifically, and we provide more detailed case in our submission of these, we encountered one woman who was sanctioned and ended up relying on a food bank and high interest debt. We encountered a traveller who, despite a decade of whole-time schooling, left the schooling system with very low levels of literacy and was enrolled in training, mandated training, that required very high levels of literacy, and he had his name amended against his wishes on his CV to conceal his ethnicity in job search. We encountered an aspiring architect whose carefully husbanded career ambitions, she found her job search was micromanaged in a way that undermined that carefully laid plan of developing a reputation with local employers, and then was directed to reduce her expectations and accept other types of work. We also encountered a pregnant woman who was directed under threat of sanction to accept work at a call centre in a location some distance away, which she had absolutely no means of getting to. There was no public transport, and she was advised to make friends with people or car share or carpool or something. We should emphasise that all respondents detailed a continual threat of sanctions, which made engagement and compliance with the various tasks they were encouraged to undertake appear compulsory. Thus, our data demonstrates that beyond the actual application of sanctions, that the process of activation under threat of sanction is in and of itself a negative experience. The process is a punishment. Our qualitative data is commensurate with international experiences. So while comparing the percentage of individuals sanctioned against international benchmarks, Jobpath is not a harsh sanctioning regime, but we know the ever-present threat of sanctions has negative long-term consequences for individuals' well-being and future earnings. While officially sanctioning decisions are made by the Intro Office, in practice and in the experience of job seekers, the recommendation of a sanction by a Jobpath provider appears to be a fait accompli. In other prior research, where we've spoken to counter staff and case officers and welfare offices, the Jobpath providers are described as deciding sanctions, and the Intro simply implements them. We did not encounter any positive experience that we could report to the committee today in our interview data. My colleague Tom Boland will detail our policy evaluation of Jobpath.
So, our interview's experience of Jobpath is that it's a scheme that actively undermines their personal reservation wage and their labour market expectations, so that they'll accept any job, however unsustainable, unsuitable and precarious. It's inspired by behavioural economics and the idea of subtle nudges. Jobpath assumes that the problem of unemployment is idleness and that a work-first approach will ultimately lead to sustainable, high-quality employment. In practice, these measures constituted a stressful and unwelcome intervention in people's lives, even described as traumatic in some cases. All of these interventions are made under the threat of sanction for non-compliance, and this pressurises job seekers to accept any work, which may explain why there's 25% commence work, but only 9% are still in employment after 52 weeks, the same as if they had not gone through the process. International research has begun to reevaluate these cliches that any job is better than none and that work is always the quickest route out of poverty. It's not the case. Many of the Jobpath interventions were already emerging under Intro and were part of the traditional local employment service supports the unemployed. What is distinctive here is that they've intensified and become more aggressive and more punitive under Jobpath. This is due to the pay-by-results model or the recruitment of staff on short-term contracts without necessarily having professional careers in the welfare system as per guidance supplied by the Educational Training Board. Given what Jobpath aspires to do, this contract has an unfeasibly short time horizon, which does not facilitate the building of durable institutional resources on the awardee's part. If Ireland really has perpetual need for the complex and contextual pastoral skills for nurturing discouraged job seekers back into the labour market, it takes time to build such capacity, and if done correctly, it could be valuable. However, a 4-year contract is an unsuitable instrument for this activity. I want to talk about creaming and dumping, so-called. Our interviews mostly reported being acutely aware from their experience of Jobpath of the so-called payments by results model that drives the initiative, and so they all had a realistic understanding of their own personal labour market. They actively encouraged and supported their Jobpath caseworker in creaming and dumping, whichever, and they tended to grow frustrated, really, when they're asked to do things that they perceived to be harmful to their career prospects or their responsibilities. In fact, they tried to negotiate the creaming and dumping that they knew to be going on. It's also worth noticing at this point that there's a huge inconsistency in the geographical distribution of sanctions. It does not correspond to the level of the population of the unemployed. It ranges from about an 8% sanction rate in Louth or Limerick to almost nil in Mayo. And this inexplicable variation is consistent with our long held research which suggests that there is a significant variation in how rules and eligibility are applied and interpreted office by office, day by day, welfare officer by welfare officer. This sort of thicket of schemes, their constant reform, their adjustment, their modification, make the rights of a service user unclear and contingent to both users and frontline staff. In conclusion, activation in the form of human capital building and supported job search can have long-term positive effects on the supply side of the labour market. We suggest that investing in training and the Back to Education scheme are the best tools for doing this. Policies which emphasise welfare conditionality and sanctions are short-sighted. They require compliance under threat of being put below the minimum level of income, and this mainly has negative consequences. There is significant international research on the consequences of sanctioning, from short-term poverty to long-term health and well-being problems and negative future effects on earnings and employment. The knock-on effects on the economy are to foster precarious, low-wage, no-wage cycles and alienate those who are most disadvantaged and to unfairly pressurise those who are temporarily out of work. Rather than using both sticks and carrots, we suggest removing the threat of sanctions as a core administrative tool, because the benefits of an education opportunity or a job, these should be sufficient motivation in themselves. Sanctions may have some part to play in the benefit system, but their current role is out of all proportion and against the principles of natural justice. Clearly, sanctions should be subject to stronger regulation and oversight, and we've recommended more specific measures elsewhere in our previous research and submissions. Regarding Jobpath, the payment by results and short-term orientation of the Jobpath contract are unsuitable policy instruments. The power which providers wield over the unemployed is neither appropriate nor commensurate with the vulnerability of this population. The work-first approach involves market coaxing, which basically involves reducing job seekers' choices and expectations. It reduces public faith in the social safety net, and it undermines the entire labour market. The impact of Jobpath on individual lives is decidedly negative, even when sanctions were not imposed. We envisage a long-term impact on overall social cohesion for these policies as a result of the experience and throughput of so many citizens through these initiatives. We suggest that the committee should advise strongly against renewing Jobpath and that we need to learn the lessons of this expensive, caustic at the point of use and broadly ineffective misadventure, because we must seek to build a high-quality labour market welfare policy. Thank you very much.
Dr. Griffin, Dr. Boland, thank you very much for your presentations. Dr. Griffin and Boland, I just want to ask you one general question before I hand it over to the committee. I'm had my glasses off, so I'm not reading the figures, but the point I want to get to is, I think you said since 2012 your research involved interviews with 121 unemployed people. You went on to say that 25 subsequently had experience or contact with Jobpath. And the question I really want to pose is more, I suppose, from the point of view of the research. How valid is it then to, I suppose, draw on that to a national programme where there were thousands of people involved? In other words, what I'm trying to ask is the sample pool of 25 appropriate to make broader findings? Is the sample pool, I suppose, representative in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of geographic location? That is not a criticism on your research. It's for us as a committee to understand that profile, that you have 25 people, you had very detailed experiences with them, but in terms of their age, their profile, their gender, their education, their geographic location, how do you try and draw that out into, I suppose, making comments and recommendations on a national programme? Yeah. That is not a criticism, but it would help the committee, and then I'll hand over.
We appreciate that there's different strengths to quantitative, statistical and qualitative work, and that there's certain challenges in that. The first thing we have to say is that not all of the people we speak to are even aware that they're dealing with Jobpath with Torres Nua. They don't always distinguish between the intro and Torres Nua. Secondly, we are ongoing research, so we have a PhD worker who's a researcher who's currently doing this, and we have specific built-in gender, age, rural, urban weightings as per the current
Population.
composition of the research.
Maybe just to say, we don't think there is a coherent experience of unemployment in Ireland. One unemployed person to another person is a radically different person with their own life course. And there's no coherent system for administering unemployment in the social welfare offices. So if you look at, for example, at the sanctioning rate in Wexford, it's 8%. If you look at the sanctioning rate in Waterford, it's close to 1%. So even in very narrow geographic spaces, you find a huge experience. It incorporates people who are very vulnerable lives, people who've had very difficult lives, and people who are transitioning from one job to another. So the way we administer unemployment is called unemployment, but actually the experience of it is like, and just to clarify, our 121 interviews is since 2012. Mm-hmm. So we typically do a tranche every second year of people, and the 25 we encountered, they're people who specifically reference, just naturalistically as we interview them, Jobpath and relay their experience. So it's a random sample, but what's very interesting is that each one has consistently reported this negative experience. The data set from 2012 to 2015, there was a much wilder accounts of the experience of unemployment. Since then it's become more consistent, and instead of looking to themselves as not getting a job for personal reasons, they now narrate their experience of unemployment as being a negative experience that is being administered to them by the state.
Thank you very much. Senator Higgins, are you still under